All right, our final speaker, let me grab my phone here for a second. I had a chance yesterday to correspond with Hall of Fame sports writer Jason Stark, which many of you are probably familiar with, Philly guy. And I asked him about our final speaker tonight, and he said, Doug is the coolest guy ever. He thinks about baseball and life in ways no one else does. He's smart, he's really funny, he has amazing stories, and I have no idea what he's planning to talk about. So no pressure. It's just a Hall of Famer saying that about you and a guy you know very well. Our final speaker was taken 12th overall by the Cubs in 1991. The former Penn Quaker was traded to the Phillies for Mickey Morandini in 1997. He also played for Texas in a 9-year major league career. In 1,115 games, he hit .277 and stole 136 bases. With the Phillies in 1999, he batted .325, 204 hits, 101 runs, and 34 steals. He had 2 300 seasons at the plate, 2 100-run seasons, and a pair of 30 stolen base seasons in his career. After a return to Chicago, he appeared in the 2003 postseason with the Cubs, ending Game 3 of the NLCS with a game-winning triple. Defensively, he led National League center fielders with 13 assists in 1999. His career .992 fielding percentage in center field is tied for 30th all-time, and he ended his career with a 293-game errorless streak. He is now an analyst for ESPN. He's worked for the Marquee Sports Network in Chicago. You may have read him on The Athletic, in the New York Times, or his 2010 book, The Game from Where I Stand. He's an interesting guy. He has taught classes at Penn, Yale, and UConn, and he and Jason Stark co-host the Starkville podcast. Please welcome the multi-talented Doug Glanville.
I might take this mic off. Can I take this off? All right. Can you get it out? Let's see. There we go. All right. Yes, my move. All right. Kind of like teaching a course, you have to walk around the classroom, right? So a little freedom here. Thank you for that glowing introduction. And it's a true honor to be here. And Von Hayes, I watched him, from my couch and growing up. Bobby D over here, this guy can fly. So it's fun to be able to be the kind of young guy that's watch their whole careers and then kind of follow up behind and be inspired by them. So, thank you for that. And, Reading Hot Stovers, what a tradition. 1961, I learned about the Reading old-timers that came before from Lou here. And, baseball and education, that's my life. My mom was a teacher many years at the middle school where I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey. She moved on to the high school, so I actually graduated after 8th grade from the middle school, and we were the first freshman class in the high school. So I kind of lost that ability to be like the kings of the school in 9th grade. So I followed my mom up to the high school, and we became very close as the first freshman class to have 4 years at Teaneck High School. And so, I heard a couple of people here, by the way, students, congratulations on your accolades and also your commitment to education. I heard a couple of 5-point-something GPAs. That's okay, it's weighted, but at that point you should just teach the class. Come on, 5.03, why do you even have, you don't need a teacher, just teach it. So, so that experience of growing up in Teaneck was important to me. Teaneck was a town that voluntarily integrated, and that was a really powerful thing in the 60s. And I think what I learned from sport, and particularly baseball, was this sense of unity and coming together as one. That was something that was important in a community that was so diverse and kind of going a little bit against the grain on what was sort of a segregated world. And so I grew up with teammates from all kinds of backgrounds, and that sense of power of coming together around that common goal became really central to how you can overcome differences and how you can learn how to communicate. And you think of Bobby D, Vaughn, they played for a lot of people, right? People you'd never been exposed to from all over the world. And you'd arrive at spring training and you'd say, wow, I have to figure out how to come together around people I may not have even met, may not even speak the same language. And that's sort of the power of baseball. And for me, with my mom being a teacher, understanding education right behind there, when you combine it, and this is such a great event because you're raising all the money to support students. And by the way, like I have a 17-year-old, 16-year-old, 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old. So 3 in high school, and you talk about hot stove, that's hot stove right there. But three in high school, and I know what they went through. They were pandemic students, and that was extremely difficult, right? Being online, and the fact that they are, back into this robust life of playing sports together, and you're rewarding them for their academic excellence. I mean, that's extremely important to recognize because we know what they went through as students. And parents, of course, I raise a glass to the parents because I know I'm driving, it's like Uber dad, right? I mean, I got a softball player, I got a baseball player, and who's it, Cole? Is it Cole who's going to West Virginia? Yeah, so my daughter is committed to gymnastics there, so we'll see you on campus, man, all right? Okay, Country Road, take me home. All right, yeah, we go, all right. So I'll see you on campus over there. So, but one thing I did before coming here is I said, let me look up, we're defining hot stove. This is hot stove season. And I thought it would be cool to go back, because I was a huge Phillies fan growing up. I mean, huge Phillies. 80, I remember 80 really well. And so it was an incredible honor to come back as a player and put on the uniform. So I thought it would be cool to go back hot stove and go year to year, just the moves that were made in the offseason sort of leading up to 1980 and beyond. And of course, Bobby D's on there going to the Cubs, and Vaughn was traded for an entire organization, which is amazing. But I looked at the years, the 76 Dave Cash and 77 Bake McBride, right? 19 Bake, that guy can hit and he can play. Pete Rose, free agency in 1978. 79 traded for Greg Gross, who was my hitting coach in Philly, which was cool. And Manny Trio. 1980, I love Juan Samuel, right? Juan Samuel fans? This guy, triples, doubles, homers, stolen bases. Traded Ryan Sandberg and Boa for Ivan De Jesus. So it goes both directions. And Rhino, and you talk about Bobby D talking about Rhino as a teammate. And one story about Rhino I always think about is I was a guy that was pretty quiet, just sort of went about my business. And I think there was a little challenge sometimes, like the perception of being like an Ivy Leaguer. It's like, oh, you ask too many questions. And so I kind of didn't say as much as I probably wanted to. And I took a little heat for that, so I was kind of quiet and sort of like Rhino. And so I kept hearing this, and I was like, well, there's a lot of ways to love the game. There's a lot of ways to express it. And I learned over all these years with these teammates, you need rah-rah types, you need quiet strength, you need different people who know how to kind of be diplomats. And I was confident that was important because I mentioned the background growing up in my hometown. But I wasn't sure in the minor leagues, just sort of figuring it out. So I'm in A-ball. And Ryan Sandberg that spring breaks his hand. This is a freak accident, pitch in spring training, breaks his hand. And we hear that he's going on his rehab assignment to Daytona Beach, Florida. And I happen to be in Daytona Beach. So I keep hearing about, okay, Ryan Sandberg's coming down. So this, of course, is like, wow, the big leaguer, I'm on the same field. So he comes down, and true to Bobby D, I don't think he spoke the whole time he was there. Didn't say anything, really, but he just worked. He showed up, he was on time, he had his drills, and it was magnetic to just watch this guy prepare for a game. And on the other team, I remember this guy, Greg Colburn. I don't know if you remember Greg Colburn. This guy could flat out hit. And I'm in A-ball, so I feel like I'm so far away from the big leagues. And Colburn comes down on a rehab assignment for the opposing team, and he goes 8 for 8. I was like, big leagues, that's just another level. He literally, you can't get this guy out. So Sandberg's hitting and warming up. And as I watched him prepare and then watch his meteoric rise, MVP, one of the best players in the game, and a Hall of Famer, I watched someone who really didn't necessarily have to say a word and was excellent, was great. And I think that helped me to validate that I can be myself, I can be who I am, with someone who didn't really say a lot, but he spoke with his bat, he spoke with his heart, he spoke with his intelligence on the field, he spoke being a kind of a prankster a little bit as a teammate, all the ways that he contributed. So I think for the young athletes out here, it's important to be comfortable who you are. What you bring and the way you bring it is fine. That's what you need. That's why you're a team. You can't be every role. That's why you have different positions and center fielders and shortstop. So I think those experiences taught me a lot. So when I kind of go through this list as I continue, I see all these moves that were made. You know, the 80s, you know, Bobby D and Sarge traded away, and they got Glenn Wilson, who had a great arm. Remember Glenn Wilson? Whew, what an arm that guy had. Kent Tekulve. And then I watched this video that I had never seen before. It was the day that Steve Carlton got released, 1986. And I didn't realize that they had this whole, he gave like a speech over the Jumbotron, and it was like a whole thing. I was like, and he got released. Usually it's like a retirement ceremony, but he actually got let go from the organization, and Bill Giles was really in tears over it, but they had to let him go. A pitcher that I used to imitate in wiffle ball in my front yard all the time. I also did a little Von Hayes with the wide stance, you know. He was, you know, that was quite a stance he had there at Von. But eventually the hot stove comes home, and you're fortunate when it does. And at some point I was drafted in 1991 by the Cubs, and one day in 1997, after I kind of battled my way and, you know, through the minors and all these things, I finally had kind of overcome a lot of doubters and made it, and then the Cubs traded me away. And the thing that was strange about that is as you know, I was traded to the Phillies, and it was a weird, very mixed feeling, because although I was a huge Phillies fan, that just seemed like, oh, it makes sense. I went to college in Philly, loved the Phillies, and people thought I chose the college because of the Phillies, you know, all these things. But yet, you know, I'd put in so much work in Chicago, and I wanted to prove that I was the starting center fielder there. And they traded me away. And so that hot stove became really personal. And I think you sort of learn that, you know, all these traditions we have in this sport, that although part of hot stove, to me, reflects change. And the thing that's cool about baseball is, like, here you have all this continuity. I'm sure some of you in here have been here for decades, going to hot stove events every year. And yet you're embracing change as well, because in hot stove, you know someone's traded, someone's moving, someone's getting signed. And one day we were fortunate, and all three of us up here who played were fortunate to be one of those players. And so when the heat turned up for me, it just so happened the night before I got traded, my grandfather passed away. And my grandfather, this is right around Christmas, December 23rd. And the thing I always remember about my grandfather was every time I saw him, and this was every year we spent Easter down there, and then every year Thanksgiving they would come up to us in New Jersey. They were in North Carolina. And before we'd leave, he'd always ask me the question, "You still hitting that ball?" You know, he had that southern accent, right? So he asked me that every time, "You still hitting that ball?" And I could always answer yes, because I was playing then. And I mean, he lived a pretty long life, and when he passed away, I was still hitting that ball. And I just remember the Phillies reporters, you know, here's the story. The Philly kid kind of comes home, and they're asking me questions. And at some point, one of the reporters, this is over the phone, says, "You don't really sound that excited. You're going back to your childhood team. Like, you sound kind of down." I said, "Yeah, I lost my grandfather the night before, and so we're going to spend Christmas, like, my mom's going to go down there with my brother, and I'm up here with my dad, and it's just, you know, it's not exactly the traditions we've had to celebrate." So I think in that moment that I was traded, I was on the stove, right, literally. And you learn over your career that different years change and all these seasons change, and you hope that you're on this hot stove in different ways, because that means you're still relevant, right? You're still in the game. You still have a shot. You still could win something. You still could get a ring. All the things the goalposts that keep moving. And then, you know, one day, you know, that stove isn't really on, right? It's like your career, you get older and your hamstring blows out and all the things that start to happen. And then you go and, you know, I spent time looking at the sort of back of their baseball cards. You know, I see Vaughn ended up in California, right? Kind of went home, and it's like, what's that story, right? Like, how do these players end up? One year I was wearing a Texas Rangers uniform. Like, how did that happen, right? And so all these moments that lead up to the change, and along the way, you are hoping the stove stays hot for you, because that means people are still interested. And so I started to learn that at time, you know, and this is for a lot of the young players out there, you kind of have to be your own pilot, right? You have to light your own stove. You have to realize that there's other stoves. You have to realize that even though you could live a dream like Major League Baseball, there's so many other opportunities and dreams to have. I retired, I was 35 or 34. And, you know, it's like, okay, what am I going to do now? And although you might have done well or made money and all these things, you have this whole world. I didn't get married until after I retired. So I had a whole nother life with 4 kids now that I could not have even imagined. And so, you know, different stoves, different fires that you light, and lighting your own fire. I think, what Vaughn was saying recently about change and positional versatility and adapting. One story I think about is Dusty Baker. So I played for Dusty, and once again, it's a trade story. So I'm with the Texas Rangers. Now, I don't know if you guys know, but so I left Philadelphia, and I'm going to leave the story as if I got traded because that just is better. but the reality is, in 2003, another major change happened. The last game of the season, the season before in '02, I was having a really rough year in the Phillies and struggling. And my dad had been sick from 2000 to '02. And I remember '99 I had this great year. You read it off, 325. I felt like I was 10 steps ahead of every pitcher. I was like, I figured this big league thing out. And then spring training rolls around the next year, and my dad has a major stroke right before the season starts. So we're in Seattle, and I'm like sleeping by the phone, and I'm asking my mom, like, what do you want me to do? And she's like, okay, just play the first week, and then come home since you're coming back east to Philly, and just go up to Jersey on your day off. So I was like, okay, I got to wait that long, and so she's updating me, and I'm totally disconnected with the game at this point. Of course, I'm thinking about my dad and my mom, and so during this time, I remember I forgot how many outs there were in a game. And you mentioned John Vukovic, we were talking earlier. So Vuk was like a father figure in some ways because he was, the guy on the road, hug him. He's just very emotional. So I remember I told Vuk, so I forgot how many outs there were in the game. And the worst thing about it was a 1-1 tie. I think Steve Finley or someone was hitting. Fly ball to center field, Arizona Diamondbacks. I catch the ball and I start running in for the third out, and there was 2 outs. And so the guy at second tagged up to third, saw that I wasn't paying attention, and then he scored. So we ended up losing that game by 1 run. So I'm like destroyed over this. And then of course I'm thinking about my dad. And I remember Terry Francona was the manager, and I said, Terry, look, Vuk told Terry, I said, here's what's happening. His dad had this major stroke. He's here. He's not going home yet, but he's going to go home over the break. And, not the break, but on the day off. So I was like, so he told him what was going on. And Terry, just out of defense of me, was preparing the press saying, look, give the kid a break. His father had this stroke, but when he told, it sort of became public knowledge, right? So today it'd be like it went viral. And the mixed feelings about that, he was protecting me, but at the same time, everybody knew at that point. And I was still trying to figure it out myself. And so with that change, everything changed, right? My father, and so he was sick in and out of hospitals for 3 years. So my 2000 season, 2001 season, 2002 season. And I remember Hal McRae was our hitting coach, and Hal said, this is like '01, he said, well, you're hitting 260, probably could be better. It's not like the season you had a couple years ago, but considering what you're dealing with, that's pretty good at this level. So just kind of keep going. And you had these moments of people talking to you. So when that season, finally after 3 years, and this is where, you talk about divine scenarios. So I'm with the Phillies, Larry Bowa is the manager, and I wasn't playing well at all. And my father, it was right around my birthday in August, end of August. I'm about to drive a day off to go home. I see my dad, and now he's kind of deteriorating. And he kind of comes alert, and we kind of talk, but he's not quite all. He's like half in a coma, semi-coma. Driving back home, I got pulled over by a local state police officer by Jersey, so that's not great. But I grew up a lot of police officers. I was like, okay, so we talk. And he's like, I recognize you. He's like, I see now with your ID. He's like, I know you're having a tough year, but your value to the community is way more than your batting average. And that's what the officer told me. And he still gave me a ticket, of course. so I'm like, all right. But that actually changed everything, that one gesture of kindness. And I ended up finishing really well. And then I look up at the end of the season, and I have 997 career hits. So I'm like, oh, I'm pretty close. And my dad is, meanwhile, not doing well, but I'm kind of like, well, I'm pretty close here. And so we go to Florida, and there's 3 games to go. So I'm like, all right, I might be able to get it. And Boa, is all his hot hand guy. He's like, he doesn't play me the first game. So I was like, okay. So I'm still at 997. The next day, he doesn't play me again. Pat Burrell's starting, and Pat comes around to third base, slides into home, and like wrenches his shoulder. I don't know what happened. So I come off the bench, And I'm at 996, and I get a hit, and then I hit a home run. I got 2 hits. So I think I had 996. That was 97, and 98 was a home run. So I have 2 hits to go, and there's 1 game left in the season. Excuse me. And so 1 game left of the season. Lee Tobin, I don't know if you know Lee Tobin, PR. This is unprecedented. She walks in the locker room and goes into the coach's office, manager's office, and says, Doug Glanville needs to play today. Like, she literally made the lineup. He's got 2 hits left. I want him to get his 1,000th hit as a Philly, so let's just do this. So he starts me. And I woke up that morning, just this feeling like, I don't know who's pitching today, but this guy can't get me out. I just had that feeling. It's not often you feel that confident, but I was just sort of in a certain zone. And Carl Pavano, poor guy, was there pitching, and we just did well against him. And I got hit the first at bat, hit the second bat, third, and then I got a 3rd hit. So I ended up with 1,001 hits. And I remember vividly, the guy named Turner Ward was on our team. And Turner was this fun-loving dude, from the South. And he would always say at the end of the season, hey, you got to hug your teammates, because next year change is coming. You're not going to play with this guy anymore. You're going to get traded. So this is the last time you're going to be with this group. So I remember talking to Turner and looking up, at the scoreboard, and this is at Miami, so it looks, it's a football stadium really, and you look at it, and the scoreboard, it said 7:05 or some 7:15, and sure enough, that night, my mom calls, and my father had actually passed away that night. So I got my 1,000th hit on the day that he passed away. And so you think about change and things you can't control. And to me, that was the greatest honor in some ways, even though that devastating loss. But all the things that have come together through your career that leads you to these ups and downs. And so eventually, when I talked about change the next year, I could have stayed in Philly. I had actually a better offer to stay in Philly, but I felt like it was time for something different. And the hot stove sent me to Texas. I played for Buck Showalter, who was here last year. And in Buck, and just going away and starting fresh, I ended up getting traded back to the Cubs, where I met Dusty Baker. And now I'm kind of the old man in the locker room. I'm starting to get older. And one last thing that made me realize that adaptability was so important and so core to you being a ball player. Talk about Vaughn saying playing different positions. Is Dusty Baker, we clinch, we get to the postseason, and we win the division. Only trip I ever had to the postseason. And Dusty pulls me aside and says, look, we're making the roster for the postseason roster. And it didn't even dawn on me. Like Vaughn said, I started most of my career. So it didn't dawn on me that I might actually be on the playoff roster. I was like, I might actually make this roster. So he calls me in the office. He says, so Glanville, you played a little bit of infield, right? And I was like, infield? Like in the dirt? Like that part? He's like, yeah, you played some infield. I was like, no, I've never played infield at all, not professionally. He's like, let me ask you again. You played a little bit of infield, right? It's like, wait a minute, so do I have to play infield? He's like, yeah, so here's your choices. You could be the emergency infielder for the Chicago Cubs in the postseason, or you could not. So I learned very quickly that I was the emergency infielder, so I got a glove. And I would have made probably the most errors in Major League history if I got on that field, but I ended up being the emergency infielder. Thankfully, it never came to fruition. But I learned in the trajectory of a career, of a life in the game, there's a lot of change. And life is still happening. And when you're in the very kind of self-centered world, you kind of forget how much things are changing around you. The season ends and your daughter's walking now, or what. I mean, it's just, you see the blur go by and you kind of know it, but you're in this kind of world that requires so much focus. And I think, as you end up to that point where, you can't play anymore, and it's usually not willingly, you reflect on that and try to take those lessons with you beyond the game. And so for me, I was able to, take those experiences and learn about your own stove, really. People heat it up, People sign huge contracts, but even for the greatest players in the game, there comes that time where the phone stops ringing, where the stove's not on anymore, and you have to figure out, what your new passion is and what you love. And so, I commend everyone here because you love the game clearly, but you're also supporting the next generation and celebrating them as athletes, celebrating the importance of sport and what that means in life and the greatest lessons it teaches, but also that they can be balanced in so many other ways. They can be great students and be leaders in the world. And so by being behind them, you're exemplifying that. But you're also telling them something that, although you're a great athlete and you're D1 and all these schools, there's something else that will come to an end or change in certain ways, that you have to have something else. That competitive spirit has to be translated and transferred. And sometimes it's to a next generation, sometimes it's some new hobby, sometimes it's to your children, whatever it may be. And so, everybody here is supporting this mission. It's a fantastic mission. And I just want to thank everybody for supporting it and these incredible values that you're passing on and to allow me to be part of it. Thank you.